Hi, and welcome to the Kubernetes podcast from Google. I'm your host, Abdel Sigiwar.
And I'm Kaslin Fields.
Welcome to the third episode of the four-part special series for the Kubernetes 10-year anniversary. In this episode, we spoke to three leads who are carrying the Kubernetes torch into the future. Nikhita Raghunath, Nabarun Pal, and Paco Thu. We discussed how they got involved in the project, how they transitioned to lead positions, and what advice they have for new contributors.
But first, let's get to the news. The Kubernetes community released a blog commemorating the project's 10-year anniversary. The post outlines Kubernetes history from the beginning of containers to today. It highlights major milestones in the development of the technology and cool stats on how the community has grown over the last decade. Check it out at kubernetes.io.
The call for proposals for KubeCon North America's breakout sessions is now closed, but the CFP for co-located events at KubeCon North America is still open. Check out the list of co-located events and get your submissions in by July 14.
Kubernetes Community Days, or KCDs, are locally run events for the Kubernetes community. There are several events happening around the world this summer. KCD Zurich and KCD Barcelona are both happening on June 13th. KCD Italy will be on June 20th. Through August, there are also KCDs in Munich, Lahore, Pakistan, Lima, Peru, and Taipei. Through the rest of the year, there are also KCDs in Washington, D.C., Austria, and London. Only KCD Austria currently has a CFP open, and it closes June 22nd. So if you're interested in speaking at KCD Austria, get those submissions in. Support your local Kubernetes community by attending any KCD that is held near you. And that's the news.
Today, we're talking to Nikhita Raghunath. Nikhita is a staff software engineer at Broadcom. She is currently a member of the CNCF Technical Oversight Committee, overseeing all technical matters at the CNCF. In the past, she was a member of the Kubernetes Steering Committee, a tech lead for SIG Contributor Experience, and has also won a CNCF Top Committer Award. Currently, Nikhita is a co-chair of the KubeCon and CloudNativeCon conference. Welcome to the show, Nikhita.
Thank you so much for having me here, Abdel. Glad to be here.
I've seen you around multiple times before. Of course, you are in the CNCF, you are in the KubeCon chair. I've been in the committee a couple of times, but we never had an opportunity to talk until now. So I'm glad we had the opportunity. Thank you for being with us.
Oh, definitely. I've seen you around in the community so many times. So definitely the podcast, of course, doing with Kaslin. So yeah, it's a pleasure to meet you too.
Awesome. So, we're doing this as part of the 10 years anniversary for Kubernetes. So we're talking to a lot of people, from those who have been around for a while, those who are kind of more new, a newish, I should say. And we wanted to talk to, we call them the new leaders, although some of you have been around for a while also. So let me get going with my first question. So you've held multiple leadership positions. You do the TOC now, but you've been a co-chair of other SIGs or tech lead of other SIGs. You did the Contrib X. How did this whole thing start?
So it all started when I was a student in university as a Google Summer of Code intern. So at that time, Kubernetes had put out a project which said hey, improve this thing called as a third-party resources, which doesn't make sense anymore because that was the name for CRDs before. And that's kind of the thing which blew up the whole extensibility of the Kubernetes ecosystem at that time. That's CRDs, for context, is something that you write controllers on and operators on and so on. So that's something that I worked on, and I wrote a lot of core features for it, including validation, sub-resources, and so on. So I worked on one particular feature. And at that time, my mentor was from Red Hat. And he said, hey, I really enjoy working with you on this. And do you want to do an internship with Red Hat? Because I'm still a university student and continue working on this. Mm-hmm. So I worked on it for almost a year or more, I think, a little bit. And then I realized I really love working with the community. Everyone is so friendly. I've made a lot of friends from around the world. And I want to continue doing that even after my internship ended. So I picked up a lot of tasks in other SIGs as well. So this originally was SIG API machinery. So I continued working there. Mm-hmm. And then SIG Contributor Experience, SIG testing, release, CLI, kubectl bits and so on, a lot of other places as well. So these and more what we call horizontal SIGs. So horizontal basically means that they're cross-cutting across various areas. Mm-hmm. And when you're involved in them, you get a big picture perspective of the whole project. And that really helped me in working across multiple areas for sure, but also interacting with a ton of people, which helps you like definitely build a network, but like I said, get a ton of context across the whole project. And eventually that led me to becoming the technical lead for SIG Contributor Experience. That also won me the Chopwood Carry Water Award in 2018. And I realized like there was a steering committee, and I have a story to share about that. I'll come to it in a bit. But I joined the Kubernetes Steering Committee, worked there for a while. All of this eventually led me to winning the Top Committer Award in 2021. And then I moved on to the CNCF side of things. So I'm part of the CNCF Technical Oversight Committee now, and also one of the co-chairs for KubeCon. That's kind of that's my role. As part of that role, I basically go through all of the proposals that people submit for KubeCon and select them, decide the program for KubeCon and so on. So yeah, that's me.
Yeah, so you're curating the KubeCon content, essentially.
That is correct, yes.
Yeah, that's actually pretty impressive considering you started in 2018, was it? 2018, 2017?
So that was around 2016, 2017, yeah.
2016, okay. So kind of 3 years into the project's life in general, right?
Yeah, it was pretty early. Yeah, it was like a smaller community then. Now it's just so huge. It's overwhelming, but I love it at the same time.
Of course. So you mentioned a bunch of things, and one of them was the Google Summer of Code, which is an internship program that Google puts together for open source projects. And that's how you got involved?
That is correct. So Google paid me to work on the Kubernetes project back then.
And that's actually a great way for, everyone who is interested, but also especially university students to get like paid internships so they can work on open source projects.
That is correct. And we've actually had a lot of people who started out as JSOC interns, but now they are maintainers and leaders within the project. So I definitely still recommend that as a great way to get started.
Yeah, I think at the moment when we're recording this, the application have closed, but there is they operate every year, and it's a really cool program. So through all of this journey that you just described in details, how did you find yourself in the project? Like, was it easy? Was it difficult? Like, how was the community kind of welcoming new people, I would say?
The community is definitely welcoming, but it's very hard to find your place in the project, I would say. Like if you start out as a new contributor, everything is overwhelming. There's a lot of things to do. Everyone's doing a lot of things, but you just don't know where your niche is or where you can jump in and start contributing, becoming a maintainer in a few months and so on. So I think one of the things to understand is that this might not be easy. It might take time. And that's okay. For myself, when I started, it was very early on in the project, so there were there's a lot of things that needed to be done, even now, to be very frank. But at that time, so I was getting involved in multiple SIG contributor experiences, something that I really liked. Working on it was touching the whole project. And that's when I reached out to the other leads. I told them that I'm really interested in this and I want to work towards a leadership position. And I was consistently putting in work for this, and even they reached out and said hey, we also think you'd be a good fit, would you be interested in as well? So that's kind of how I got the TL role. Is one that was a different approach. So I said, I want this, and how do I get there? For the steering committee, it was a little different for me, because in my mind back then, steering committee is all bigwigs, and I am nowhere near that. It's all maintainers who worked on the project since the beginning and so on. So when the election was going on, I forget which year that was, to be honest, 2020 or something like that, Jay Singudumar, so they reached out to me and it was DM, and they said, hey, I have a favor to ask for you. I'm not sure, what is it? And they said, I want you to run for the steering committee. At first I thought that was a joke, but turns out it was not, and they were serious. And they said, hey, why don't you consider putting your name in? And I did, and I enjoyed the experience. I didn't get in the first time, which was okay. And I think it was a good experience in actually putting my name out there and telling other people that, hey, I'm really interested in this role. And that's when people know about you. Hey, they think of you in the way that, okay, this person might be a good fit for the steering committee and so on. So the next time I tried, so the next year, and that worked out. And that's kind of how I joined the steering committee. After my stint in the steering committee, I worked on, I ran for the TOC election, the CNCF TOC election, and I got through there. So I think there are different approaches. One is when you actually want something, you work towards it, you reach out to people and you tell that, and I actually recommend that. The steering one was, there are areas when you feel that maybe you're not a good fit for it, but you are. So my recommendation would be definitely to reach out to people even when you think you're not there yet, or just put your name out there so that people know who you are and know the fact that you are interested in it. And then maybe if it doesn't work out now, it'll work out in the future.
Yeah, you definitely touched on a lot of things. And one of the questions we were going to ask was the leadership role. But one thing you said that I liked very much is getting involved in a project like Kubernetes. There's a lot of things to do, and there is probably not that much people who have time to guide you. So you have to figure things out yourself, right? Like if you are the kind of person that has to wait for somebody to tell them what to do, it will be probably harder, I would say, to get involved.
I agree. I think one of the challenges we face as maintainers is also people who reach out and say like, hey, I want to contribute. How do I get started? I really hate that question. Like, I love that people are coming in and they want to contribute, but I don't have the time to kind of explain everything from the start. Yeah. So what I like is if someone reaches out and says like, hey, I'm really interested to contribute. Here's the background I have. Here's all the research I've done. And this is what I think is interesting to me, or at least the area that's interesting to me. And do you have any issues or bugs or whatever that I can work on? So having some more information about yourself and the kind of work that you want to do and the research that you've done is a great way to gain maintainers' interest and have, like, my point is basically help maintainers help you.
Yeah.
So, like, make it easy for others to help you, and I think then you'll have a much better experience working with the project.
In other terms, people have to do their homework, right?
Yeah, that is correct.
Nice. Okay. So what are your day-to-day responsibilities look like? As of, like, I know that it changes depending on the role you're in, but like, what does your day-to-day look like today?
So right now, I'm mainly, my named role that I have is part of the GitHub admin team. So this involves everything related to like having admin rights over all GitHub projects or GitHub organizations, repositories, and so on. And before this, I was a technical lead for SIG Contributor Experience. I'm still involved there. So this means kind of reviewing PRs related to anything that touches the meta aspects of the project, be it GitHub, automation, and so on. But I was going to bring this up later on, but like I kind of took a step back from those leadership roles so that we can bring in the next generation of leaders. In fact, for this, we had a lot of trouble initially because we wanted to replace ourselves, like a bunch of us leaders in SIG Contributor Experience. But we were having trouble doing that because a lot of folks used to come in as drive-by contributors, contribute for a little bit and leave. But this was not enough time for us to mentor them and also just share enough context and gain trust in them. So we came up with this. I'm kind of digressing here a little bit, but then I want to mention this because this was pretty cool. It was that we came with a SIG Contributor Experience Leadership Shadow Program. And then we set up a cohort of leaders that we personally mentored. And I know personal mentorship is not that scalable, but I think that helped us because it was very focused towards leadership and not the day-to-day activities, right? So like people are continuing doing the day-to-day activities, but then from a leadership perspective, it helps giving personal context to them, or having one-on-one conversations and asking like, hey, what are your thoughts on how you're going to approach a complicated issue that we see and so on, and giving some insights into how to navigate that. So things like that kind of help me. So I'm involved, but I'm not doing all the... Basically, the other way to put it is like all the hard work's done by other people right now. But to get to that role where we can, like how you said, like define the second decade of Kubernetes with a new generation of leaders, that was what it was all about. So I think a lot of us maintainers are kind of focusing on how we can replace ourselves. And that ends up becoming all our day-to-day responsibilities more than anything else.
I mean, in all the interviews we've done for the 10 years anniversary special, like this echoed quite a lot, like the sustainability aspect of how do you drive the project, the sustainability aspect of the community itself, how do you get people who stick around and not just like, write one PR and move. So it's quite interesting. And I think also the fact that the project was born in 2014, which I consider Kubernetes being the new generation of open source projects compared to, say Linux kernel or how open source used to be done before, right? Which was kind of different. It's impressive how the community is able to move and adjust in such a short period of time. 10 years is not long, right? 10 years is, for open source, is not long.
Yeah, definitely.
Right. So then bringing this back to your job, your actual day-to-day job, how does your work with the Kubernetes community relate to your actual job?
I work on a Kubernetes platform at my day job, so I work on anything and everything regarding Kubernetes and parts of some other projects like Custard API and so on. But contributing back to upstream Kubernetes is not really part of my job as such, but my manager is super supportive. He's also part of the CNCF governing board. So he understands the big picture of why it's important to give back to the community, but also stay involved there and how that can help from like a day job perspective. So to answer your question directly, like Kubernetes is something that we consume, or I consume at my day job, but not necessarily contribute back to it. It's a little bit of my personal time, and so on. But I think one thing that really helped me is like setting business aligned goals. So being involved in areas that I can actually justify back to my employer that, hey, like me being involved in this area helps me achieve this goal at work. I think that was a very big part of why I'm able to do Kubernetes at my day job.
Yeah. Yeah, and definitely you're not the only one, because, I mean, some people get paid by their employers to actually work on open source projects, but not everybody is in that situation. All the time I spend on doing the committee work for the KubeCon, that's just personal time, right? Actually, all the time I spend on doing committee work for every single conference I'm involved in is personal time. All right, so we touched a little bit on these, and you gave a little bit of advice through all the discussion, but this will be my last question. I don't want to use more time than needed. What would be your advice for people who are interested to either contribute or to get into a leadership position? Let's start with contributor first.
I think for contributor, my main thing would be help the maintainers help you. So reach out with very specific asks and talk about what, like you said, do your homework, talk about what homework you've done and showcase what you already know so that we can suggest what you can take next. Remain consistent. So no one likes drive-by contributors. Drive-by contributions are great, but then if I'm investing time in mentoring someone, I would like to feel like there is a return on investment in that. So please stay consistent. Yeah, I think from a contribute perspective, I would say that. From a leadership perspective, I would say don't feel shy to put your name forward. I've done that mistake a few times and people had to literally poke me and say, like, actually go put your name out there. So don't feel shy to do that and ask people who are already in the role on what it's about. Like, so sometimes it might not even be actually something you want to do, right? Like once you learn the day-to-day of what goes on behind the scenes. So yeah, I think just talk to people, ask them very specific questions on like, how do I get there? Sometimes this means networking more and learning more about the role. So yeah, I would say be very clear on what you want to achieve, talk to people, and be okay with realigning your goals if needed as well.
Nice. Okay, so then my last question. KubeCon India, are you excited about it?
Oh, definitely. This is the first time KubeCon's coming to India and that we wanted it for a very long time.
Yes.
So I definitely excited. And yeah, very excited to see what that looks like and how many people show up and what that eventually feels like. Yeah.
Yeah, well, there was a Cube Day India before, which was a single day event, but this is going to be a full-fledged 3 days, 4 days, if you consider co-located events in India for the first time. And I was talking to Dims the other day and I was like, okay, I'm going to try to make it. I want to go.
Awesome. If you're going to be there, like that'd be amazing. I hope you can make it. There's also want to plug in one thing. We also took a Kubernetes birthday bash this Friday in Bangalore. And I think it's also happening in multiple cities across India. I think CNCF has a website where they put on everything. I just don't know the details of all the cities, but we're doing one in Bangalore on 7th June this Friday. So I'm very excited about that too.
We covered this as part of the other episode because this episode is coming next week, not this week. This week, we're publishing an episode with Tim Hawkin and Kelsey Hightower on the 6th, on the actual birthday. But in the last episode, we already covered it. But I think we'll keep this in the recording because there will be parties happening through the month in different parts of the world. And we'll definitely include a link for people to go check it out.
Sounds good, yeah. And I hope to see you and others at KubeCon in North America as well as KubeCon in India.
I am definitely excited about that. Well, thank you very much for your time, Nikhita. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. This was fun.
Awesome.
Today, I am so excited to be speaking with Nabarun Pal. Nabarun is a staff software engineer at Broadcom, a maintainer of the Kubernetes project, a member of the Kubernetes Steering Committee, and a chair of Kubernetes SIG Contributor or Contributor Experience. In the past, he was the release lead for Kubernetes 1.21 and has served 8 release teams. Nabarun also works actively with the Python community by organizing PyCon India and has been recognized in media publications for his work. Welcome to the show, Nabarun.
Thank you, Caitlin, for the warm invite. I am glad to be on the podcast for this episode, especially. It is very close to my heart.
It's so exciting to have you here. And you've been on before since you were a release lead, and we always do the release episodes. But we also work together in open source as co-chairs of SIG Contribex. So
Yay!
And with this, I think I have interviewed, or at least been on episodes with every member of the current leadership team of SIG Contribex.
That's so nice.
Yeah, it just goes to show how active these leaders are. If I may say so myself. So our topic today, this is our third episode in our 10-year anniversary series. And I really wanted to speak with you because in addition to being a co-chair of SIG Contribex, you are also a member of the steering committee and you just got elected last year. Congratulations on that. If I got that right.
I was elected last year.
Yeah, got that right. So you've been doing a whole bunch of things and obviously release lead as well. So you've been doing a whole bunch of different leadership type activities in the project, but you just became a co-chair of SIG Contribex along with me. So within the last year or two, and your steering term began last year. So you're a relatively new leader, but you're doing all of these leadership things. So I really wanted to talk with you about leading Kubernetes into its second decade. So let's start off with, you're a relatively new leader in the community, but of course, leaders never start out leading. So you must have been involved with the community for some time. Can you tell me a little bit about how your Kubernetes journey began and how you got to where you are now?
Oh, yeah. It's a very interesting story to begin with. I actually didn't know about the existence of Kubernetes probably until around 2017. And back then, I used to work at a startup where we were trying to build an application platform for data scientists and machine learning engineers. It sounds very niche now, but back during those days, it was not that much well-running business. Basically, we wanted to build a platform so that data scientists and ML engineers could run their models, deploy them, and experiment on Jupyter notebooks. The infrastructure was quite traditional, and we used to run on VMs, and we built our own scheduler and an orchestrator to run systemd units on VMs running on AWS or Google or any other cloud provider as deemed necessary to so. Then we decided to try out this magical thing called Kubernetes. And I started modernizing our logic to leverage Kubernetes for all things. I wanted to give back to the Kubernetes project after I saw the magic happening. And I started contributing to areas of the project that we were actively using in our product. So first I began with the Kubernetes Python client, and it has been a long journey since then.
So when did you start doing like code contributions in open source Kubernetes? You started being aware of it in 2017. So how long did it take for you to get to the point where you were doing code?
So I think the first code contributions that I did to the Python client was around 2018, if I remember correctly.
Pretty quick.
The community was very welcoming. I really felt nice to be around the people who used to maintain the Python client, and they're still doing it till date, which is great. I mean, the resilience in people I really admire in this community, and they were very receptive to suggestions from new people like me. And I got the real boost, I believe, at KubeCon Europe 2019, held at Barcelona, where I attended my first Kubernetes Contributor Summit as a new contributor. I got exposure to so many great individuals back then, and I got exposure to Contributor Experience and SIG Release, which is when I felt I found what I wanted to keep doing in the community, and that's where I found my place in the project.
I had no idea that you had like a machine learning HPC type background. It's amazing to me how many people in the community have actually those kinds of roots of trying to run machine learning type workloads, which at the time were very niche, as you were saying. But now, of course, they're kind of everywhere. But it just made so much sense, even in the early days, right, for a distributed system and a scheduling system like Kubernetes to be used for those kinds of use cases.
Yes. I mean, it was all about us coming with a use case and finding Kubernetes to be very suitable for its dynamic scheduling and orchestrating capabilities. We just fell in love with what Kubernetes did.
Awesome. We're going to dive into that more in our next episode where we'll talk more about HPC backgrounds of folks in Kubernetes. So you're kind of giving us a lead into that. But we'll come back to leadership and contributing right now. So you started using it, and then you started contributing to the parts that you were using, and then you started getting more involved with the community, and you found these other areas that you were more interested in. So how did you kind of do that progression of being a contributor and then eventually moving into all of these leadership roles?
I think being on the release team early on when I joined the community shaped my thoughts like pretty much on why I should lead or move into leadership role. That gave me that purpose. So the kind of impact that you can create on the project and the people in the project made me realize that this is something I really want to do. I loved aspects of what the release team was doing and the kind of impact that even Kubernetes with its releases makes year on year and release on release every quarter. And then when Jeremy asked me whether I'm interested to be the lead for 1.21, I obviously knew what I would answer. Then there are other aspects. So as in when I was doing that, I was also part of Contribex, and I want to really give credit to the great programs run by Contribex. I'm not saying it as a co-chair, but I'm saying it as a true member of the community and seeing myself grow in the community because of Contribex initiatives and seeing a lot of other people grow in the community because of those initiatives, specifically the mentorship cohorts. Even as you mentioned earlier, we signed up to one of those leadership mentoring cohorts to get guidance on becoming one of the next chairs. And eventually we graduated to be the co-chairs of the group. And then the other aspect is steering committee. When I was doing Contribex and release and getting involved with the Python client API machinery, I was really motivated to solve the challenges that I saw while contributing from the other hemisphere of the world. I wanted to work on like enabling diverse geographies to contribute more comfortably and also help SIG leads create a sustainable growth path for contributors to become leads themselves. Overall, I think we have done well on that front as steering and also as the community by initiatives like async meetings, making sure that we have enough participation from other geographies in the meetings by having meetings in their active working day time zones, and having things like sub-project leads where there's an additional thing that people can look forward to and people can get recognized for their work, which creates like a more fine-grained ladder for contributors to become leaders in the community. Overall, I think if you see the common aspect in all the three areas, the opportunity to make an impact on people and do great things for the Kubernetes community made me actually consider those leadership roles.
I love it. And before I got started as a leader in the Kubernetes community, I would always hear people talk about how much of a challenge time zones are for the project. I never really understood that until I started running a bunch of meetings and trying to get the whole contributor community doing things. And it really is challenging to make sure that everyone is included in ways that are comfortable for them. So thank you for being passionate about that. And I'm really excited that all of the guests on this episode actually are all based in Asia, not because like all of the leaders of Kubernetes are in Asia, obviously not. We're talking to lots of Kubernetes leaders in this series, but I'm seeing a lot more folks from Asia and other regions coming up in leadership in the project. So we're getting a lot more global in our leadership, which helps make the contributor base a lot more global as well.
Yeah, I mean, I am baffled. Like, I feel very happy and nice seeing the kind of progress that you have made. I mean, when I started contributing, there were not many people contributing. I mean, it's not about like policies or it's not about like meeting time zones. It's just about like awareness. Like people were using Kubernetes, but I think we have done great on the front of like evangelizing, contributing to the project.
which is something that SIG Contribex cares a lot about. And you mentioned
Yes.
that there were some particular areas of SIG Contribex that you found really helpful as you were getting involved with the community. I think it's really hard to explain to folks a lot of the time what SIG Contribex does. I think once I start explaining a lot of the time, people get it. But what are some of those kind of projects or areas that SIG Contribex owns that have been particularly helpful for you as you've gotten involved with the community?
I think the leadership cohort for sure, to get like direct guidance from existing leaders, that helped a lot. Then I think just showing up, being a fly on the wall initially, and how Contribex gives that opportunity for you to do a very diverse set of things. Like you can do comms management, you can do infra management, you can do GitHub administration, you can run your own mentoring cohorts if you want to. You can be part of the events team, which is where I also started contributing to Contribex. After liking the 2019 Contributor Summit, I was part of the organizing team for 2019 San Diego Contributor Summit. So that helped me gel well with people. So overall, I feel like all these initiatives that contribute, basically the openness with which people can just get onto the train and have a fun ride.
Yeah, it's a very broad SIG. And hearing you say that being part of the Contributor Summit planning was helpful to you is especially heartening to me right now, because I am a lead for comms for the Contributor Summit and I have 5 shadows.
Thank you so much for mentoring those people.
It's going to be an adventure. I'm looking forward to hopefully giving them enough work to get them as involved as you are.
I think they have a great future.
I hope so. That's certainly our goal as leaders in the community. Let's move on to my next question for you. Since you've had a number of different leadership roles in the community, I guess we could talk about each one of them. What are some of the day-to-day responsibilities that you have in the Kubernetes project, maybe grouped by these roles? Because they're very different roles.
Yeah.
And I would imagine you do very different day-to-day activities in each of them.
Yeah, so I would say, like, I'll start with contributor experience for sure. If I have to summarize what I do in Contribex, I think we both do a lot of different things in Contribex. And to summarize, like, I think what we do is improve the experience of contributors by creating and promoting programs that help them. And
do you have the charter there in front of you? It's about it.
I mean, I remember that part of the charter because
it's a good part.
Yeah, if I have to explain people what Contribex does, I sometimes get lost because there are a lot of things that we do. So I need to tell them one-liner on what we do in Contribex. And that's why I say, like, we make things that work for the community and we retire programs which don't work for the community anymore. That's the short version. And then even inside Contribex, I am very involved with GitHub administration. That part of the project basically maintains the large GitHub organization that we have. Actually, multiple GitHub organizations. We have like, I think 6, 7. I always get confused by the number of organizations that we have. And we manage it through GitOps. Everything is inside a Git repo, automated workflows, and we enforce policies to administer that repository. That is one aspect. The other aspect is my steering committee involvement. So steering committee, in short, tries to maintain the overall health of the community by making sure that everyone abides by the charter, every group. Steering committee doesn't take like technical decisions. Steering committee delegates those technical decisions to the special interest groups, which is part of their charter. But we make sure that everyone abides by the charter, and then the community groups are healthy and they're sustaining. Then we maintain some root level accounts like Google Workspaces, etc. And often, like, we get requests for, let's say, visa letter sponsorship or some other things like funding requests. For example, if you want to run a newsletter, LWKD, and you need to get a subscription to some service, you ask us, and then we basically ask CNCF, like, hey, could you please budget some funds? Basically, we liaison for the whole community in front of CNCF to get funding, to get, if I can give an example of this, CNCF does a great thing by sponsoring people to travel to KubeCons, because not everyone can afford their way into KubeCon. And if some leader in our community, they want sponsorship, and if like a word from steering helps in getting their application approved, we also do those activities. This is like a gist of what I do in the community. I was very active in release earlier when I was part of the release teams.
And that was a very different day to day, I'm sure, as well.
Yeah, that was very different day to day. That work was also very bounded work. Unlike what I have been talking till now is wide, unbounded. Sometimes you need to get into uncharted territories. In release, like roles and responsibilities were well defined. I did enhancements, I did release lead shadowing, I did branch management duties. I was an emeritus advisor for a cycle. I have cut a few patch releases in the past, so those duties were very well defined. And then there are often things which relate to my day job, like working on few features that are beneficial for the community. That also I work on, but those are not like day to day. Those are more like ad hoc whenever they come in.
Yeah, it makes sense. And that's something I often try to explain to people about releases, that it's much more structured than basically any other part of the project. It's got the shadow process where you apply and they get a whole lot of applications and they have to have a process to like choose applicants, and then they now have a process as well to remove shadows who are not doing the work, and they have all of these very well-defined roles that they cycle through 3 times a year. So, it's got to be very on point.
Yes. We are reputed for releasing on time year on year.
Ish.
Our on-time performance is really good.
Yeah. It's always a challenge, though. Those last few days leading up to the release are always stressful, even not as part of the release team.
Yeah, I have been there and I admire everyone in the release team who often burn midnight oil near the release date just to make sure that people who consume our artifacts, they get the artifacts on time.
And I would love to have a short phrase for the steering committee like we have for SIG Contribex. Maybe I should go look at the charter. Maybe there's a good short sentence in there, but I feel like it's so hard to explain steering to folks. I think CNCF liaison for the project is kind of the best explanation I have for folks.
Yeah, and then I usually say like we're the body which govern non-technical aspects of the project.
Yeah.
That's how I usually define. I mean, the one-line definition here is much more concise compared to Contribex.
I do think people often get confused, though, about steering versus Contribex on what responsibilities lie with each, because they're both such broad groups about the contributor community of Kubernetes, but they're a little bit different.
Yeah, so as Contribex has much more responsibilities, I would say, in terms of maintaining those contributor programs, and steering basically acts as like the overseer of whether everything is working fine or not.
Yeah. Lovely. So let's talk a little bit more about how you get to do those day-to-day activities in the Kubernetes project. How does your Kubernetes work relate to your day job?
I have been one of those fortunate people in this planet who get time out of their day jobs to work on open source. I know that the set of people is very small compared to the large workforce on this planet. I am part of a team which builds a product on top of Kubernetes and another project called KCP. So for the listeners who haven't heard about KCP before, it's an open source project to build horizontally scalable control planes for Kubernetes like APIs. And this is from the documentation directly. So due to my role, I am very involved with API machinery, auths, and scalability aspects of Kubernetes, and also with the KCP project, because KCP is kind of like an extension of it's a fork of Kubernetes, essentially, which does Kubernetes like things. In the past, I worked at a team in the same company building a Kubernetes distribution. Over there, I was involved with SIG release as well, and that is where I used to get like majority of my time to open source, and hence all of these activities I could do. Currently, almost all of my leadership involvements are practically on my own time. So it's a little challenging, but I have a lot of like other technical aspects which relate to my day job.
For me, I've talked about on the show before that my job essentially considers my open source work to be 20% of my time. So we kind of try to keep it within that box. It sounds like you're kind of in a similar place where you get to do some of it for your work, but only a small portion at this point, at least. In the past, you've had more, but at this point, a lot of it is volunteer time.
Yeah. So both times it's 80-20. Earlier it was 80 open source and 20 day job. Now it's 80 day job and 20 open source.
It's such a convenient way to split the time.
I mean, I don't know who designed it, but it works.
It keeps coming up, though.
Yeah.
Lovely. So let's start to wrap up here. And what advice would you give to a new contributor, or I guess an active contributor right now who is trying to move into a leadership position in the project? We'll start with that one.
Yeah. So what I usually tell people is find your purpose in the community. Find what drives you the most. I think figuring that part out early on gives the best motivation to pursue the path of leadership, as it's not always a bed of roses. You will often run into obstacles, and the days where you feel like you're running into obstacles, that purpose that you found out early on will keep your motivation alive. And that's what happened with me too. The next advice that I think that I always give people is like, seek mentorship from existing community leaders. Ask them about their journey. I have had like really great conversations with leaders in the community about how they got into certain positions and what motivates them to be there. That gave me a lot of perspective on like, oh hey, this is how it works, and hence I do want to do it. And sometimes during those conversations I found out, okay, this is not for me, this looks great, this is a great work, but maybe it doesn't align to my purpose. So it's okay, whichever way you go, it's okay. But it's good to know, it's very important to know what is out there, and just ask people for their experiences. Ask them like, can I get on a one-on-one with you, or whatever suits best, and follow what they're doing. Be a fly on the wall. Basically see what they're doing in the community if you want to do it in future, and that's how you be there essentially.
Yep. It's all about just being there is often what I tell people. The more you're there, the more you'll learn about what's going on, and the more all of the other people involved will know about you.
Yes.
So that we can help you contribute to the community. And let's talk a little bit more about what advice you have for folks who are looking to get started as contributors. Maybe they're not looking at leadership yet. Maybe they're inspired by leadership and want to move in that direction at some point, but they're not even contributing to the project yet. What advice would you give to folks who are new to the community?
So it's an evergreen question, and it comes up like very often. And the question comes up so often that I have templated answers ready for this, because usually the first conversation is always the same, and then from the second conversation you start seeing the divergence, and then basically it depends on how the conversation goes with that prospective new contributor to Kubernetes. So the first thing that I tell people is like, find your interest area. You should try out a few things in the start and see what excites you. Best case is when you contribute to an area that aligns to what you work on day to day. You will keep the motivation alive basically, because you would have aligning interests all throughout the day, and you don't need to be conflicted on, okay, what should my mind think as a primary thread at what times of the day. The other thing is like being consistent, showing up. And it's not about like showing up, let's say 20 hours a week. It's about spending, let's say even like couple of hours every week to start with. And it's much better than like spending time in bursts. Like for example, you spend 10 hours 1 week and then you don't show up for like 5 weeks. That doesn't work out for anyone in this scenario. What you can do is you be consistent, don't be bursty. You can just show up in the meetings, try to understand, spend some time what people are talking about in the meetings. If you have doubts, raise your hand or ask questions on Slack asynchronously if you don't feel comfortable speaking up on the call. Or if the meeting is not like something that you can attend, depending on your day or night or whenever it is, you can always go and see the recordings. But again, coming back to the point, being consistent is very important. The next thing is like keeping expectations in check. it's very hard to keep a track of motivation across time unless you think in a very sustainable manner. You can't think about like, oh, hey, I start contributing one day and then in a couple of weeks I start committing code. Yes, you can do it, but then there are corner cases. What you need to do is like be consistent, keep expectations in check, and don't burn yourself out. It's very easy. The perils are high, and it's okay to take a break. If you feel, oh, hey, this is feeling overwhelming to me, just pause, breathe, think about what you're doing. Maybe take a day or a week off and then come back. That works out really well. These few advices have worked out for me, and a few contributors have given me like feedback as well over time that these parts and pieces in different sets and permutations like worked out well. So I feel happy about giving these advices.
Each individual's experience in open source can be so different.
Yes.
And so I feel like a lot of the time the advice is kind of general and broad, but it kind of has to be that way because each individual's experience with the project is going to be different because you want different things out of contributing, and it's a long-term thing. It's all about putting down those roots in the community and then sticking around. So the paths end up being very different for each individual person.
Yes, I agree. Like, I think every individual in this community has a unique path. I am yet to see two people who have the same paths.
Yeah, or even very similar. Like,
Yeah,
they're usually not even close.
correct. Like maybe even like some part of their pathways are same, but then I've seen like everyone is involved in some distinct sets of things in the community, and neither they're like completely disjoint, neither they're like completely same.
Wonderful. So we hope all of you out there are excited to join the Kubernetes project and get into contributing, but keep those expectations in check and know that this is a long-term commitment if you do start contributing to open source. And I'm so glad that I got to talk with you today, Nabarun, and I really look forward to seeing what you do in the future to lead Kubernetes into its second decade.
Thank you so much, Caitlin. It was great talking.
Thanks.
Today we're talking to Paco Xu. Paco is an open source team lead in DAO Cloud. He started working on containers and Docker in 2016 and later started to participate in the Kubernetes community in 2018. He is currently a member of the Kubernetes Steering Committee and works mainly on kubeEDM and SIG node. He is also the co-chair of KubeCon and CloudNativeCon China 2024. Welcome to the show, Paco.
Hi, everyone.
Thank you for being with us. So, Paco, you've been involved for quite a while, since almost 2018, but you're considered kind of like the new generation of leaders, right? Can you tell us a little bit how did your Kubernetes journey started?
My journey almost started when I joined Docker Cloud. At first, we are working on a Docker-based path, and later we used the Docker Swarm at first, and within a year or two, we switched to Kubernetes. And then I started my journey in the Kubernetes community, and later in 2020, I started working full-time on the community.
Nice. So it have been around 4 years almost, right? Since 2018?
Yes, I have been working in the community for full-time for 4 years and maybe 6 years.
Total. Okay. Yeah. So how did you find your place in the project? How was that experience, finding something you can contribute to and work on?
Yeah, before I joined the community, I'm a Kubernetes user. And when I joined the community, I started from my familiar part. And as my team is working on the infrastructure and also the installer, so I started from the kubeEDM and also Kubernetes. And this leads me to the part of the Kubernetes SIG node and the SIG class lifecycle.
Nice. Cool. Then how was the transition from contributing to taking a leadership position? Because you are in the steering committee, right?
Yeah.
How was that transition?
I think there are several reasons. At first, I participated into the community by myself, and later I help others to join the community and helping them to learn about Kubernetes, answer questions, and help them to merge their pull requests And later, I started my promotion of the best practice from the community to our company, like the CAP, the production readiness review process, and also other best practice from the Kubernetes community. And also, I started to share my experience in some events like KCD China and also KubeCon. And I also started to organize a KCD in Chengdu 2021. And later last year, I organized the Kubernetes Contributor Summit in Shanghai. And this year, I will be the co-chair of the KubeCon and the CloudNativeCon in Hong Kong in this August.
Nice.
So through those activities, I started to think like a maintainer. And I also participated into the steering committee election last year. And now I'm a member of the steering committee.
Nice. I'm a member of the program committee for KubeCon China this year. So I just finished the reviews like a few weeks ago.
Yeah, thanks.
It was pretty cool. It was pretty interesting actually to be able to see submissions from different parts of the world. So in your current role within the Kubernetes community, what does your day-to-day responsibilities look like?
Currently, I serve as a member of the steering committee, and also my primary work is on the SIG node and the KubeCon. I also contribute to the release team in recent release cycles as the release signal team shadow and lead. As I'm now the co-chair of the KubeCon China, and I'm very busy on the events, so I may focus on some maintenance tasks this release cycle, and later I may start other works in next release.
All right, cool. So then how does your work with Kubernetes itself in the open source world relate to your job?
At first, I was a developer for our enterprise platform based on Kubernetes. And later, after I joined the community, I started to work as we will learn the latest information from the community and share it to our team. And this also helped our product to build our roadmap. And also, when our customer using Kubernetes, they meet some problems, the Kubernetes contributor or maintainer can solve the questions faster and better. We can provide a better solution and better products to our customer. This is the basic thing for our company.
Nice.
And this also helps us to learn the latest information. And the latest information sometimes helps us to forward.
Nice. Yeah, you mentioned that you use the CAP process and the product readiness review process internally, right?
Yes, we use part of that, not the same one, but similar.
Yeah, but you got inspired from the community and then you implemented a similar process inside your company.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is very interesting. This is the first time I hear something like this. This is the first time I hear people taking advice from the open source community. It's usually the other way around. Because the production readiness review, I think that used to be a Google process, an internal Google process. CAP, I think, is something that the community came up with. But it's just very interesting to see that an open source project helps with more than just the code, right? Just processes as well. Yeah. All right. So thinking in your current role, and I assume you work with a lot of new contributors, right?
Yeah.
All right. So then the question, what advice would you give to people who are either thinking about contributing to Kubernetes or thinking of transitioning to a leadership role?
For my view, I think our initial goal is to become a better engineer, no matter a leader or not. So first, we should continuously improve our skills and also help others. When you started to help others, I think you become near to the leadership. And another thing I think we can do is to learn from current leaders and also current maintainers. We can observe and learn from their behavior and also their decision-making process. And we should think as if we are in their role. And as we are working in the open source community, all decisions are made in public. And you can find official history in the CAP and also in the GitHub issues or pull requests and also the SIG meetings all the meeting videos are public. So you can learn from those resources to know how to become a leader and how to become a good leader. You may choose, you can see how the leaders work, and then you can choose to become what kind of leader you want.
Awesome. Well, that was all the questions I had for you. So thank you very much, Paco, for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day.
I'm so excited that we got to speak to these newer leaders in the Kubernetes community. We have folks from steering, we have leads of SIGs. Nikhita is just, a superstar.
Yes, she is.
And Abdel, you got to do the interviews with Nikhita and Paco, and I haven't gotten to listen to them yet, actually, as we're recording this. So how did those go?
They went super well. I think it's funny that we call them the new generation, although Nikhita, for example, have been involved for quite a while, right?
Yeah, I mean, it takes a while to get into leadership, right?
That's true. That's true. Yeah, so Nikhita was awesome because Nikhita have been involved. First of all, she's been involved since university, right? Because she got into Kubernetes through the Google Summer of Code, which is the paid internship that Google has. And then since then, got involved in the project, served in a bunch of SIGs.
She is actually already emeritus of SIG Contributor. So, I mean, fair point on that one.
Yes. Yeah, because before the interview, she was like, the way you wrote your questions make it sound like I just started. And I'm like, that's not what we're implying here.
Yeah.
It's hard to find the people who have real impact and who are really involved and can have a good conversation. I think in trying to list the people, it was a little bit challenging because we don't want to, as Nikhita said in the interview, we don't want to have the drive-by contributors, right? Yeah. The people that contribute one PR and move on. But yeah, it takes time for people to build up enough experience to have something to say, I think. And yeah. I think Nikhita is one of these people.
Yeah. It was very difficult categorizing the experts that we wanted to talk to. So sorry if we kind of missed every now and then, but they're all wonderful. So I'm excited that we got to talk to them.
Exactly. I mean, ignore the titles of the episodes. What's important is the interview itself.
Yes. There we go.
So yeah, Nikhita is involved for a while doing, all the Contrib X, which... one thing I found interesting in an interview with Nabarun, I did not know that the Contrib X people are in charge of GitHub admin.
We are, yeah.
I did not know that.
That is a scary one.
Is that new or was it the case for a while?
I think it's been that way for a long time. It's kind of a tricky one for us to manage because it requires so much trust from the project for folks to have that level of access to the whole of the GitHub of Kubernetes.
The kingdom. Yeah.
So there's a little bit of shared ownership there with steering because it's such a high trust position for GitHub administration.
Yeah.
But there's also kind of two different parts of GitHub administration. We were talking about this recently as we were working on our annual report for the SIG, that there's the GitHub admins who are those super trusted people who have really high access. And so that's one part of it. But we also have folks who do a lot of the kind of day-to-day work of doing things on GitHub that have lower levels of access. Mm-hmm. So there's kind of actually two different pieces, GitHub administration and GitHub management. We considered splitting those into two different subprojects. We haven't yet. Maybe we'll continue to consider that. But yeah, GitHub administration is a pretty kind of tricky one to manage because of that high level of trust.
Yeah, it was just very interesting for me to learn. I never thought about it until I was talking to Nikhita and then listening to the interviews. I was like, that's interesting.
GitHub is critical to the contributor experience.
Of course. Now it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was cool. That was discussing with Nikhita. We talked about a lot of things, how to get involved, how to don't sit around and wait for people to tell you what to do. But I think this is something that echoed across all the interviews we've been doing. So yeah, it was all in all very cool.
Yeah, that was one piece of advice I got very early on in my contribution in Kubernetes is, of course, one thing, don't sit around for people to tell you what to do, but also if you're a leader in the community who wants people to do things, assign it to someone, put a name to the task, otherwise it's not getting done.
Otherwise it's not going to get done, yeah. The other advice that I found very interesting or very cool, I think, from Nikhita was if you're coming as a new contributor, do your homework, come in with an idea of what you want to do.
Yes.
Because that would help the existing contributors help guide you, right?
Exactly.
So if you already know the area you want to work on, generally speaking, it doesn't have to be technical, right? It can be the contributor experience. Then people would be able to like help guide you navigate kind of like the whole complexity of the project, I guess.
Yeah, nobody knows everything that's happening over here, but
Exactly.
we can try to help direct you to the things that will be of the most value to you as best we can. And if you're doing something that you feel is valuable, you're going to be more successful at it and more driven to keep getting involved with it. So we want to help you find those things.
Exactly. And then Paco, we had a good conversation. I think the two things that stand out from that conversation was the fact that Paco said that they took KEP as a process and they implemented it inside the company where he works.
Oh, interesting. I mean, the Kubernetes community as a like precedent, as something to be emulated. I love those stories because the Kubernetes community is something else.
Yeah.
It's such a large community and there's so much organization and process that's gone into it at this point that we have some really good processes that were created for this community. So I love hearing things like that.
Yeah. And especially that it's not something you hear very often, that people take stuff from open source and apply it to enterprise. It's usually the
business,
other way around.
yeah.
Right? Exactly. So that was pretty cool.
Awesome. And I was a election officer, I believe, for the one where both Nabarun and Paco became members of the steering committee. So I was kind of excited to hear from them now that they're in their steering roles. I feel like a lot of folks, I might have said this before, I feel like I've said it a couple of times recently then, that I feel like folks often don't quite know what they're getting into with the steering committee.
Yeah.
Because it's really hard to kind of condense it down into a single sentence, like I was saying with Nabarun. It's really hard to describe exactly what the steering committee does in a way that like clicks with people. So I was excited to hear from them now that they're in it.
Yeah. And Nabarun also have been involved for quite some time.
Yeah.
Including working with you on the Contributex SIG.
And he'd even been on the podcast before as a release lead.
Yeah.
The folks in this community, they are amazing.
Yeah.
So many folks do so many things. I love to see it.
Yeah, it's super cool. It's like the contributors and it's just everybody's so humble and so nice and so kind of willing to help. So it's very, very humbling to be involved.
So we hope that for the 20-year anniversary, probably not us, but whoever's running this podcast then, we'll interview some of you out there.
Yes. We'll carry on for sure the tradition of doing the release leads, that's for sure. We'll try to get the community on the podcast as much as we can. We, of course, have to balance out the guests. But for me, it's just like these 3 episodes and the next one have been super humbling to be able to talk to all these people. It's just pretty cool to be able to do this show.
It's so cool. And it's also eating away at me how many people were on our list that we really wanted to talk to that we didn't fit into this series. So I'm hoping we can maybe fit some of those into future episodes someday.
I hope so as well. Well, thank you very much, Kathleen. That was great.
Thank you, Abdel. And thank you to all of you out there listening. We'll see you next time. That brings us to the end of another episode. If you enjoyed this show, please help us spread the word and tell a friend. If you have any feedback for us, you can find us on social media at KubernetesPod or reach us by email at kubernetespodcast@google.com. You can also check out the website at kubernetespodcast.com where you'll find transcripts and show notes and links to subscribe. Please consider rating us in your podcast player so we can help more people find and enjoy the show. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.